A Nobel Prize-winning professor is on his deathbed, losing and regaining consciousness every few minutes. Apart from his immediate family, all his graduate students are around as well. The professor regains consciousness and looks at the bookshelf near him. He goes, "What are these books?" His family members and students go, "These are all the wonderful books you've written throughout your illustrious career. You can be really proud of them." He loses consciousness. Everyone freaks out, but a few minutes later, he comes back. This time he looks at another bookshelf and goes, "And what are these books?" "These are all the books and papers written by your students, sir. You should be really proud of them. They sure are grateful for your help writing them all." He loses consciousness again. Everyone thinks that's it. But he comes back again and goes, "Many years ago, I dated this girl, and one day we're making love on a huge stack of hay, and I mean enormous, and, well, I couldn't do my job very well because her ass was sinking into the hay every time I tried to thrust." He loses consciousness again. Everyone is perplexed and embarrassed. He comes back. "Sir, why have you suddenly decided to share that strange story?" Professor looks around and goes, I just wish all these books were under her ass that day." One. A woman goes to the doctor, worried about her husband's temper. The doctor asks, "What's the problem?" The woman says, "Doctor, I don't know what to do. Every day, my husband seems to lose his temper for no reason. It scares me." The doctor says, "I have a cure for that. When it seems that your husband is getting angry, just take a glass of water and start swishing it in your mouth. Just swish and swish, but don't swallow it until he either leaves the room or calms down." 2 weeks later, the woman comes back to the doctor looking fresh and reborn. The woman says, "Doctor, that was a brilliant idea. Every time my husband started losing it, I swished with water. I swished, and he calmed right down. How does a glass of water do that?" The doctor says, "The water itself does nothing. It's keeping your mouth shut that does the trick." A shy guy goes into a diner and sees a beautiful woman sitting at the diner. After an hour of gathering up his courage, he finally goes over to her and asks tentatively, "Would you mind if I chatted with you for a while?" She responds by yelling at the top of her voice, "No, I will not sleep with you." Everyone at the diner is now staring at them. Naturally, the guy is extremely embarrassed and slinks back to his table. After a few minutes, the woman walks over to him and apologizes. She smiles and says quietly, "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you. You see, I'm a psychology student, and I'm studying how people respond to embarrassing situations." To this, the man responds at the top of his voice, "What do you mean, 800? 3? This morning, at about 7:45, I was in a long line at a grocery store that opened at 8:00 for senior citizens only. A young man came from the parking lot and tried to cut in at the front of the line, but an old lady beat him back into the parking lot with her cane. He returned and tried to cut in again, but an old man punched him in the gut, then kicked him to the ground and rolled him away. As he approached the line for the third time, he said, "Look, if you don't let me unlock the door, you're never going to get in there." Oh, the CIA lost track of its operative Murphy in Ireland. The CIA director said, "All I can tell you is his name is Murphy, and he's somewhere in Ireland. If you think you've located him, tell him the code words. The weather forecast calls for mist in the morning. If it's really him, he'll answer yes, and for mist at noon as well." The operative went to Ireland and stopped in a bar in a small town. He said to the barman, "Maybe you can help me. I'm looking for a guy named Murphy." The bartender replied, "You're going to have to be more specific because around here, there are lots of guys named Murphy. There's Murphy the baker who runs the pastry shop on the next block. There's Murphy the banker who's president of our local savings bank. There's Murphy the blacksmith who works at the stables, and, as a matter of fact, my name is Murphy, too." Hearing this, the operative figured he might as well try the code words on the bartender, so he said, "The weather forecast calls for mist in the morning." The bartender replied, "Oh, you're looking for Murphy the spy. He lives right down the street." Fee. Fi. A woman comes home and tells her husband, "Remember those headaches I've been having all these years? Well, they're gone." "No more headaches?" the husband asks. "What happened?" His wife replies, "Margie referred me to a hypnotist. He told me to stand in front of a mirror, stare at myself, and repeat 3 times, 'I do not have a headache. I do not have a headache. I do not have a headache.' It worked. The headaches are all gone." "Well, that is wonderful," replies the husband. His wife then says, "You know, you haven't been exactly a ball of fire in the bedroom these last few years. Why don't you go see the hypnotist and see if he can do anything for that?" The husband agrees to try it. Following his appointment, the husband comes home, rips off his clothes, picks up his wife and carries her into the bedroom. He puts her on the bed and says, "Don't move, I'll be right back." He goes into the bathroom and comes back a few minutes later and jumps into bed and makes passionate love to his wife like never before. His wife says, "Boy, that was wonderful." The husband says, "Don't move. I will be right back." He goes back into the bathroom, comes back, and round 2 was even better than the first time. The wife sits up, and her head is spinning. Her husband again says, "Don't move, I'll be right back." With that, he goes back in the bathroom. This time, his wife quietly follows him, and there, in the bathroom, she sees him standing at the mirror and saying, "She's not my wife. She's not my wife. She's not my wife." His funeral service will be held on Saturday. 6. A Saudi prince wants to buy a bull, so he goes to see a famous Russian bovine breeder. The Russian tells him, "I have many good animals. Here is a Swedish bull. It is born black color, but color turns white when it grows. Over there is an American bull. Color when born is red, but becomes dark brown when full grown. And here, Turkish bull. They are born dark brown, but grow up to be light brown." The prince says, "I rather like the Turkish bulls. Fine specimens, indeed." "Excellent choice, Your Majesty. But Turkish bull is special. They is bred for royalty, like you. But if you have royal blood, you must be bonding with bull calf when young, before they change color, or they will reject you," the Russian explains. "Well," the prince says, "I'm looking for a strong adult bull. I'm not particularly interested in buying a calf. I rather like this big beige bull over here." The prince attempts to pet the large Turkish bull. It sniffs his hand, shakes its head in disgust, turns around and kicks the prince with its hind legs. The prince goes flying across the room and lands in a pile of hay. "Where did you get such a horrible beast? Why did it kick me?" He sputters. "I told you. He from Turkey," the Russian explains. "His tan bull can't stand a noble." Sim. Some scientists decided to do the following experiments on a dog. For the first experiment, they cut one of the dog's legs off. Then they told the dog to walk. The dog got up and walked, so they learned that a dog could walk with just 3 legs. For the second experiment, they cut off a second leg from the dog. Then they told the dog once more to walk. The dog was still able to walk with only 2 legs. For the third experiment, they cut off yet another leg from the dog, and once more they told the dog to walk. However, the dog wasn't able to walk with only 1 leg. As a result of these 3 experiments, the scientists wrote in their final report that the dog had lost its hearing after having 3 legs cut off. 8. Fred is 32 years old and he is still single. One day a friend asked, "Why aren't you married? Can't you find a woman who will be a good wife?" Fred replied, Actually, I've found many women I wanted to marry, but when I bring them home to meet my parents, my mother doesn't like them." His friend thinks for a moment and says, "I've got the perfect solution. Just find a girl who's just like your mother." A few months later, they meet again, and his friend says, "Did you find the perfect girl? Did your mother like her?" With a frown on his face, Fred answers, "Yes, I found the perfect girl. She was just like my mother. You were right, my mother liked her very much." The friend said, "Then what's the problem?" Fred replied, "My father doesn't like her." 9. On the way there, he tells his driver that looks a bit like him. "I'm sick of all these conferences. I always say the same things over and over." The driver agrees. "You're right. As your driver, I attended all of them, and even though I don't know anything about science, I could give the conference in your place." "That's a great idea," says Einstein. "Let's switch places then." So they switch clothes, and as soon as they arrive, the driver dressed, as Einstein goes on stage and starts giving the usual speech, while the real Einstein, dressed as the car driver, attends it. But in the crowd, there is one scientist who wants to impress everyone and thinks of a very difficult question to ask Einstein, hoping he won't be able to respond. So this guy stands up and interrupts the conference by posing his very difficult question. The whole room goes silent, holding their breath, waiting for the response. The driver looks at him, dead in the eye, and says, "Sir, your question is so easy to answer that I'm going to let my driver reply to it for me." 10. When NASA was preparing for the Apollo project, some of the training of the astronauts took place on a Navajo reservation. One day, a Navajo elder and his son were herding sheep and came across the space crew. The old man, who spoke only Navajo, asked a question that his son translated. "What are these guys in the big suits doing?" A member of the crew said they were practicing for their trip to the moon. The old man got all excited and asked if he could send a message to the moon with the astronauts. Recognizing a promotional opportunity, the NASA folks found a tape recorder. After the old man recorded his message, they asked his son to translate it. He refused. The NASA PR people brought the tape to the reservation, where the rest of the tribe listened and laughed, but refused to translate the elder's message. Finally, the NASA crew called in an official government translator. His translation of the old man's message was, "Watch out for these guys. They have come to steal your land." Livin'. James is walking on a downtown street one day, and he happens to see his old high school friend Harry a little ways up ahead. "Harry! Harry, how are you?" He greets his old buddy after getting his attention. "Not so good," says Harry. "Why, what happened?" James queries. "Well," Harry says, "I just went bankrupt and I've still got to feed my family. I don't know what I'm going to do." "Could have been worse," James replies calmly. "Could have been worse." A month or so later, James again encounters Harry in a restaurant. "And how are things now?" he asks. "Terrible," says Harry. "Our house burned down last night." "Could have been worse," says James, again with total aplomb, and goes about his business. A month later, James runs into Harry a third time. "Well, how goes it?" he inquires. "Oh," says Harry, "things just get worse and worse. It's one tragedy after another. Now my wife has left me." Harry nods his head and gives his usual optimistic-seeming little smile, accompanied by his usual words. "Could have been worse." This time, Harry grabs James by the shoulders. "Wait a minute," he says. "I'm not going to let you off so easy this time. 3 times in the past few months we've run into one another, and every time I've told you the latest disaster in my life. Every time you say the same thing. Could have been worse. This time, for God's sake, Harry, I want you to tell me, how in heaven's name could it have been any worse?" James looks at Harry with the same little wisp of a smile. could have been worse. He says, could have happened to me.